Well, thank you, Igor, and thank you very much to the Cleantech, Danish Cleantech and Circular Cities for allowing us the space to have this event. We're really excited about it. And as you've already heard, we're really happy to be here because we're very connected to Cleantech and we're very involved with the concept of what a circular economy might look like. And as was already alluded to, about 18 months ago, Paul Mankiewicz came to me and mentioned that the Circular Cities was sending out a call for entries to address the urban heat island, and suggested we submit this proposal. And we brought together a great group of people. We brought Igor, who you already have met, Michael Fishman, Paul Mankiewicz, and Phoebe Mankiewicz, all of whom you'll get to hear very shortly. And we were fortunate enough to win the New York Open Access Open Invitation call on air pollution and urban heat island effect. And it was based on a proposal looking at issues around Hunts Point. And that award inspired us to form a company, the company Leaf Island, in order to bring ecological function back into the built environment. We're really happy to share the work we've been doing over the past couple of years. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so going over how we can integrate ecology into the entire urban matrix, into the roofs, walls, streets, the water's edge, above ground as well as underground. We'll talk about the big picture, the science, the technology, the scaling, and finally, how do we put it all together? And at the end, we'll be happy to answer questions you might have. So what do we mean by the revolution of cities? Next slide, please. Well, cities are all around us. 82% by latest statistics of the US lives in cities or urbanized areas. And the UN estimates that by 2050, 68%, or almost 2/3 of the world's population, is going to live in urbanized areas. Some of these areas are going to be very, very large. They're already huge. And from a climate perspective, that's not necessarily such a bad thing. Cities give us an opportunity to, by their density, to be more energy efficient. They allow us to share resources effectively, to look at sorting and reusing waste materials, and efficiently maximizing transportation and working space. They can also be centers, of course, as they have been forever, for creativity, for culture, for political, and for economic activity. I mean, cities are pretty important to the fabric of the world in which we built. At the same time, putting lots of people together in buildings clustered closely together creates some real issues. And you're familiar, this group in particular is familiar with a lot of them. There's obviously the urban heat island effect, there's air and water pollution. How do you capture storm and wastewater materials, waste in general, pollution in general, food insecurity, social and environmental injustice. And of course, with climate, we have the ever-present and ongoing issue of catastrophic events. Well, what can we do about it? Well, we believe we can regenerate cities to prepare for the coming heat wave by adapting the built environment as a scaffolding for the ecology rather. And we can do this by treating the sterile concrete, glass, and steel surfaces as the bedrock for assisting nature to regrow. The next slide, please. So our vision involves combining new construction with retrofitting our existing urban environment. And we have some images here that I'd like to talk a little bit more about. On the top, we have 3 examples of some really smart thinking and ideas about how to manage and how to look forward for the cities and urban areas of the future. On the left, we have an image of a forest city designed to be part of the Yucatan Peninsula. In the center, we have a reimagining of an urban college campus. And on the right, we have the kind of integrated living building that's starting to pop up with some regularity in Asia and across some of Europe. And these are really smart and good ideas, but they also share one thing in common. They're all new construction. So we'd like to think about not only that, but what can we do with the stuff that's already here? What we can do with the vast amount of building stock and landscape that we're going to have with us already. And we'd like to share a little bit now of some of our thinking. I'm going to highlight a few ideas, and then we're going to go over them in much more detail with Paul, Phoebe, Igor, and Michael down the road. And the lower right image is of a 5-borough maintenance facility. It's a green roof that we built a number of years ago. And the really important thing here is to see how richly overgrown the plant life is. This is way more closer to a forest meadow than it is to a manicured backyard. And that's really going to be important as we move forward and looking at how we're going to address, regreening and reintegrating the urban areas. In the center, we have a look at how you might collect water runoff from a freeway underpass. In this case, it's the Bruckner Expressway in the Bronx, a place you normally want to get through as quickly as possible. But once you look at how you can bring adaptive vegetation to use, not only can you capture stormwater runoff, not only can you capture some carbon, lower local temperatures, lower local particulate pollution, you can also take a really desolate part of the city and make it way more accessible to the community at large. You can recapture some of this space by changing its surface. And on the lower left, we have a larger example of what that might look like on a more community scale. Here, we're looking at Roosevelt Island. We're looking at adding greenery to the walls, to the roofs. We're also things you can't see here. We're adding, rainwater collection gardens and other spots. And we're also softening the coastline by bringing back mussel shoals and oyster reefs. So we'll get into much more detail about this down the road, but these are all examples of how we might reintegrate natural systems back into the existing environment. So next slide, please. So, at its core, regenerating cities for the future is going to involve returning to an ecological baseline. And in a place like Manhattan, that means we need to reintroduce the dense vegetation that we've lost to the surface area that we've built. And this is a pretty famous image that many of you may be familiar with. It's the cover of the book Mannahatta by Eric Sander. And Mannahatta, as you may well know, it's the Lenape word for the island we now call Manhattan. And as you can see, what they've done here is a visual reimagining of what Mannahatta might have looked like in 1609 when the Europeans first came in. And you see a very green space with heavily forested, with open space and meadows and shrubs and an undulating coastline. What you don't see are the 30-foot high oyster middens that indicate just how biologically rich the harbor and estuary system was. And on the right hand, you have New York City. And what you can just want to point out a couple of obvious things about New York. First, how little green there is in the city overall, particularly in this densely populated lower Manhattan. And second, how vertical it is, how tall the buildings are, how much wall space there is, and how flat and hard the surfaces are. And the third is the coastline and how it's almost entirely paved and almost entirely missing any of the features that the coastline has when it was Mannahatta. So one of the things that immediately comes to mind is that as best we can tell, the temperatures in Mannahatta in the summer at the height were roughly 10 degrees cooler than the temperatures that we face in Manhattan today. And so simply by adding vegetation, we can bring down ambient temperatures by 8 to 10 degrees. Imagine a 98-degree day becoming effectively an 88-degree day because we've changed the texture and landscape and format of the urban space. That can save literally thousands of lives, as well as capturing carbon, reducing air pollution and all the other manifold co-benefits that come from ecological manifestation, ecological rebuilding. So in a certain sense, we can really think of these hard surfaces of Manhattan as spaces of opportunity. They're really open canvases for us. We can look at ways for them to bring back leafy green cover, to the leafy green cover of Mannahatta, to the present day of Manhattan. Next slide, please. And one of the questions that's really obvious is how do we get there and can we get there? And this, I just want to take a sort of a short look at just what's available to us and why this is really very possible. And we've put together a small chart here. On the left is Mannahatta as it was, and for the sake of comparison, we're actually expanding this to the current area of the 5 boroughs. And on the right is New York City in 2021. And the first line is the open space, and of which there was 321 roughly square miles in Mannahatta, and there are about 47 square miles of parks and open space, including all the major parks, the squares, the open spaces, and the golf courses, and all put together. And that's a fair bit of open space, but nowhere near the amount that Manhattan had. So, and even if we added every single roof in Manhattan and made them all green roofs, that at most would add another 62 square miles, still well below where we were. But it's this third line that really gives us the opportunity that we're talking about here. There are 3,000 square miles of vertical surfaces if you take all the buildings in Manhattan. That's really where we have the opportunity. New York City today has over 10 times more surface area to integrate multi-layered vegetation than Mannahatta did. And in order to get further into what that means, I'm going to hand the slides off to Phoebe, who will explain and take us through just why vegetation is really a core part of the answer. Thank you, and next slide.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Josh. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Please let me know if there's any trouble with my audio. My internet has been acting up lately. Jumping right into it, Josh introduced the often overlooked opportunities that urban density represent, urban surface area, stormwater, and stormwater runoff being two of the main ones. But what would actually happen if we start to successfully integrate large-scale vegetation into our cities? In my opinion, one of the most fascinating aspects to vegetated infrastructure in urban areas is the diversity of positive outcomes associated with increased vegetation. From the personal, individual, cognitive benefits that come from biophilic effects as our screen-fried brains relax when we look at living green things, to some of the large-scale significant reductions to urban heat island and the many instances of sicknesses and fatalities that go along with it. In this section, I'm going to move into some of the specifics of physically and importantly, realistically, how something seemingly so simple as vegetation could impart such crucial benefits to urban life as we know it. Next slide, please. So let's start with temperature. Speaking of urban heat island, anyone who's taken a walk on a hot day knows that it's cooler under a single tree and almost chilly under a dense canopy. This is not simply a factor of shade. While an awning protects you from solar radiation, the air is no cooler than the air in full sun. Vegetation is very different. Rather than passive two-dimensional screens, vegetation is made up of individual leaves, which under different conditions can respond to differing environments. This is illustrated beautifully in these videos created through the work of David Gates. The leaf on the left is experiencing an energy balance much like leaves at the crown of a tree, which become much warmer than the surrounding air due to solar radiation, radiating sensible heat upwards and away from lower leaves. The leaf on the right, however, is experiencing an energy balance more like the shaded lower leaves of a tree, and through a process called evapotranspiration, is cooling the air through changes to latent heat. This cool air can then trickle down onto the grateful heads of passing people. It's through these two processes, simultaneously rejecting heat and cooling air, that plants create their own microclimates. A large oak tree can pull upwards of 25,000 gallons of water from the soil in a single summer and release it into the air. This cools the surrounding environment by altering both latent and sensible heat on a local scale, and while photosynthesizing and growing larger, ensuring even more and larger temperature impact for the next year. It would be no small feat to apply these processes citywide. However, this leaf scale biology multiplied by millions would be a powerful urban heat island altering force when applied at scale. Next slide, please. Aside from the heat of summer, another unpleasant aspect to urban life is the air quality. The dust and smells can become oppressive in deep urban canyons, and even the most hardened black coffee drinking New Yorkers will start to complain about it. Here is another benefit of vegetation, which acts like a filter, collecting dust and sequestering carbon-based pollutants in their tissues. Studies show that air quality can be increased, air pollutants decreased by 20% or more around dense vegetation, meaning that the air in Central Park doesn't just seem better, it is better. Even better, unlike modern filters, vegetation comes with its own maintenance team, precipitation and dew. These hard workers are obviously climate dependent, but here in New York City, they wash collected particulate matter from our plant filters in the soil, into the soil column, keeping it from being re-emitted and out of our lungs. Next slide, please. The next question is, of course, application. How do we as urban inhabitants utilize vegetation to improve our environment? One way those of us at Leaf Island have approached this problem is green roofs. As we discussed using David Gates' beautiful videos, vegetation can cool the air beneath it to a temperature lower than ambient. This can certainly be true for green roofs. However, not all vegetation is created equal in this respect. In terms of biology, physics, and aesthetics, there are very large differences between the two green roofs on your screen. While the manicured lawn on the left may offer a building more traditional utility as recreational space, the Leaf Island roof on the right will revolutionize the building's climate and energy efficiency. Next slide, please. If the goal is to cool buildings and cities, dense vegetation and growth media is key. While low vegetation grown in topsoil will alter the climate of a rooftop to a bearable 92 degrees on a 95-degree day, dense vegetation grown in lightweight thermally insulating Leaf Island Gaia soil can protect from summer heat and drop temperatures to a much more comfortable 82 degrees. This, of course, leads to significant increases in energy efficiency for the building, with less heat to deal with, and creates an inhabitable rooftop for residents. Of course, one green roof and one building will not reverse the urban heat island effect. These strategies must be implemented at a city scale in order to reap citywide benefits. Up next, to present more Leaf Island strategies and applications of urban green infrastructure retrofits, is a scientist, designer, and builder of green infrastructure in New York City for as long as I've been alive, my father, Dr. Paul Minkowitz. Next slide, please.
So, can you hear me okay? Is that good?
You're good.
Yeah, very good. My picture's not coming up, but that's all right. So, yeah, good afternoon. As Phoebe just described, that roof on the left is beautiful in their own way, but scale makes a huge difference in a couple ways. First, take a look at that building behind the green roof on the left, if you would. So that, and also it's worth sometimes looking in a mirror. I know we don't like to think this way, but our function in nature at this point in history, we're essentially like continental plates colliding, literally driving up orogeny structures at immense scale. Our cities are basically like mountains, except they're not built into a hydrology. And scale in the world of landscapes, waterscapes is everything. So on your left, the evaporative capacity and shading capacity are coupled. So lawn on a 95-degree day, say 80% relative humidity, that lawn will be about 103-ish degrees. The dense native vegetation flora to the right, at the base in the shade layer, 50% relative humidity will approach 80 degrees. You can see the difference. And that HVAC the chiller to above the plants that you see on the right, every 1 degree you drop the intake air temperature, you increase efficiencies by 1%. So you're starting to see there's a potential for a climb in efficiency, because all that we can do to buildings, we can tear them down and put up absolutely ideal LEED certified structures at a carbon cost that we'll never get back. On your left, the lawn is capturing something on the order of a part of a kilogram of carbon per year. On your right, you're looking at a kilogram, 2.2 pounds per year per square meter, but probably as you get more moisture, up to twice that or more. And every 200 square feet, 220-ish square feet of that green mix on your right is generating about a ton of air conditioning a day. That is to say, about, excuse me, 33 gallons of water evapotranspired, 84 kilowatts. I'm telling you this because Josh showed you Mannahatta. Well, the average year in Mannahatta would have been a carbon capture, that is to say, a carbon budget of about 1 million tons, that is to say, of carbon capture. At the same time, it actually would, every single day, that Mannahatta would produce something like 40 million tons of air conditioning, coming in at a cost of $20 a ton, of the better part of, well, $1 billion. So the point is that there's value in this. And the next slide shows you a roof installed in 2008 and 9. This is Linda Tool. Makes exceedingly beautiful high-end parts for NASA and Boeing. So basically, coefficient of expansion is a critical piece for this kind of operation. And Mike DiMarino, who runs Linda Tool, tells me he saves about 40% of his air conditioning and about a quarter of his heating. And that's when you have to run a building between 72 and 74 degrees always, because you're making high-end metal parts. So the point is that basically every building that you see, especially 1 to 3 story buildings, because there's less large surface area and interior volume to have to air condition, but those can actually bring an investment back in pretty short order. And remember, the other investment is a positive one in human health. As Josh mentioned, thousands of people can die in hot weather summer events, and did. Chicago lost the better part of 1,000 1 year in a tremendous heat spell. New York into the hundreds, and Philadelphia about half a thousand or so 1 year and more. So, but without the negative side, every piece you see that's a LEED certified building often does nothing for either carbon capture on the positive side or biodiversity. You're looking at about, if I remember right, 33 native plants. And I've counted on a single afternoon about 18 pollinators in that landscape. And I've seen kestrels, this beautiful little falcon that lives in this part of the world, and even the ground nesting bird, the killdeer, up there on several occasions. I'm sure that the warblers pass through there as well. The point is, we cannot create a natural history without bringing nature back into the cities. And that literally is our future wealth. The next slide. Shows an idea. So on the right to the bottom, the city council announced maybe 2-3 years ago that they were going to have a resolution to put in bike lanes. And I thought, well, that's nice, being a bicyclist since I came to the city in the 70s. But what are they going to make them out of? When you have 6,300 miles of roadway, how can you make that hardscape into something like Ecology? So to the right, you can't see all the details, although I'll show you on the left in a second, are basically Jersey barriers. And you cut the top off and you can fill them with water and literally make a floating wetland air filter along the whole length of roadways that keep bicyclists and pedestrians safe on one side and basically allow the water that falls on the streetscape to be moved into these floating wetland systems and capture carbon and clean air in the process. On the left, if you looked at the bottom, you can see actually some of the plastic Jersey barrier. So that's it's essentially a floating wetland stormwater capture system I built under the major Deegan Expressway a few years back, 2013 maybe. And you can see above the overpass, there's 700 miles of overpass in New York City. And this particular one is capturing 1/10 of an acre in runoff. So the pipe you can just make out in the second slide from the bottom is running into this swimming pool that we made between the Jersey barriers. And again, there's native wetland plants. I actually even have some salt marsh plants in the foreground there. The point is that now you're capturing at least a kilogram, something like 2 or 3 kilograms of carbon per square meter. And you can store kilograms of carbon per square meter because it doesn't respire, it doesn't break down in a wetland environment. And we have 700 miles of opportunity. Just to put that in context, there's only about 1 billion-ish gallons of water driving the combined sewer on any given big storm. You would eliminate that with some fraction of that water being captured in these kinds of configurations. And you're capturing carbon, and at the same time, the water that you would otherwise have to pay $6.70 to treat 100 cubic feet in the wastewater treatment plants, rather well-run runs in the city of New York, that's $6.70, 100 cubic feet in evaporative cooling would buy you about $400 of air conditioning. It would lower temperature, thermal signature, as Phoebe just showed, in the city of New York, and basically create habitat where now is basically roadway. Next slide. So, but can you do this at scale, you wonder? This is a site built in, actually started 2002 or so, but finished, I think, in 2008. It's a Sims metal recycling facility. And you can see on the top, the before, and there's an overhead, an aerial of the before. This is right on Edgewater Road, right along the Bronx River, in the South Bronx in Hunts Point. And you can see basically it was a beautiful, essentially mud puddle after a storm in prior life. And that's why it was actually John and Wendy New who started recycling in the city of New York and joined with Sims, was their capital and trade partner. And Sims eventually bought them out. But when with them, I said, okay, well, we could actually we could turn that into a kind of green oasis along a major migration corridor for migrating birds. But what you have to do, as you know, all of you have searched for apartments here in New York, you got to find space. How do you do that? You got to make it somehow. You got to get to the right place at the right time. So in those tube-like structures, storm chambers, are what I used at that point in time. Those are basically creating about 250,000 gallons of space below the pavement, which we don't have a good picture of. But if you look to the picture on the left, it's a figure of the 6-acre site, and the yellow lines are basically the runoff from 6 acres into the roughly 1/20th of an acre wetland and soil buffer. So the point is that basically all that water, including Hurricanes Irene and Sandy, through no discharge into the Bronx River, absolutely all of it was captured in the soil system and wetlands. And you can see in the picture in the center on the bottom there, those are photovoltaics. And that wasn't my idea. Sim said, why don't we do this with solar cells as opposed to standard electricity? So those actually capture the sun to power the pump that feeds the wetland you see on the left. And I built an analogous system with DEP down at the bus depot in East New York. So the point is that basically now it costs extremely small amounts of energy to bring water back into the land, and water, as Phoebe demonstrated, is basically the partitioning capacity of the vegetation structure as it layers the radiation load and reverses the thermal signature. In plain language, it keeps the particulates out of your lungs and mine, catches them with leaves, and stores carbon and reverses the urban heat island in the process. So the point is that basically building infrastructure like this has a negative cost in terms of biodiversity, carbon capture, thermal signal. And if you put it on buildings, it'll take you 5, 7, maybe 10 years, but you'll get that money back in spades, because after that, air conditioning will no longer be, and heating will no longer be what they were before, much less of a burden. And the burden will have been turned into literally carbon capture, which is the only metric that makes a difference if you're in a coastal city about to lose potentially a fifth of its property to sea level rise. I think that's where I stop.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Paul, for that wonderful description of your of all the work you've done. Well, not all of it. That's actually a small fraction of all the work you've done, but it's nonetheless incredible. And thank you to Josh and Phoebe for your parts in this, and thank you to the Danish Cleantech Hub for hosting us again. My name is Igor Bronze. I am the head of design at Leaf Island, and I'm going to go over two very important features of this. The first being how much of this green space, how much of this dense vegetation do we need, and well, do we need to make a difference? How much will it cost, and what will the city look like under this type of vision? So let's jump in. So this slide has a lot of information, but essentially we imagine what would happen if you applied dense vegetative surfaces to 1/4 of New York City, so to basically 800 square miles. And the reason we chose 25% is because we believe that that's the amount needed to eliminate the urban heat island effect, or nearly eliminate it. And if we eliminate the urban heat island effect, then there will be many other benefits in terms of wastewater reduction, in terms of negative health outcomes, in terms of energy costs for property owners, in terms of using up the waste stream, and in terms of capturing carbon. This situation will give us 6 million tons of carbon capture basically each year, not to mention all the other benefits. And I'm not going to go too deeply into each category, but I'll say that we estimate conservatively that it's going to be about $4 to $6 billion in total value. And the reason I say value and not cost is because some of these items are definitely financial benefits, but others don't show up so easily on a balance sheet. But they nonetheless provide incredible amounts of value to a city, and allow us to reach our sustainability goals. So, but it's so hard to think about 800 square miles. It's so hard to conceive of that number. So let's look at it from the cost of what would it take to green a square mile, just 1 square mile. And a square mile is 3/4 of Central Park. So if you can imagine 3/4 of Central Park, what would it cost to basically copy and paste that amount of vegetation onto the urban surfaces in your neighborhood? So right now, it's fairly expensive to build green infrastructure. It's about $20 to $30 a square foot, and if you'll get about $5 to $7.5 million of value out of it per year. So the timeframes of that are fairly long, but that's because right now green infrastructure is fairly boutique. It's not. It's always done custom. It's rarely modular, and it doesn't really benefit from economies of scale just yet. So let's say we apply the concept of economies of scale to it. So let's say we commit to greening our cities with this level of dense vegetation. If we were to do that, our supply chains would accommodate the increased usage of it. They'll become optimized, and we'll get local manufacturing to produce green infrastructure products at scale. So think about it as a comparison between 3D printing a custom object versus creating 10,000 units of that same object in a factory using a mold. So simply by applying economies of scale, we can stand to decrease the costs from $20 to $30 to more like $8 to $15 a square foot. And that would give us 54% savings. But we don't want to stop there. We want we want to work on not only facilitating that economies of scale perspective, but also granting us, but also granting us some degree of technological innovation that we apply to it. And by technological innovation, I mean a greater focus on modularity and scalability, essentially technologies that are built for that. And we believe that we can honestly get down to $2 to $5 a square foot for vegetating cities and urban surfaces, which makes it eminently viable for a large scale vision. So now now we can see our ROI, our break even on something like that in terms of the value it provides for in 8 to 27 years. And I want to bring up the solar panel example. Since the 80s, the cost of solar panels has dropped 99% to today. Since the year 2010, this is from MIT, 2010 was 11 years ago. The cost of solar panels has dropped 82%. So we believe that if we apply the same ingenuity and the same scale and the same type of economy to green infrastructure as we do to solar panels, we can get the cost down dramatically and make this eminently viable. So I wanted to just show you the kind of stuff that we're doing right now to forward that vision. So we have a patented ultra lightweight growing medium called Gaia soil. And Gaia soil is made of recycled styrofoam. So there's a callback to the circularity. Gaia soil it uses recycled styrofoam, which normally is not something we don't want in the environment. We can turn it into something that brings an incredible amount of value, right? And it's a fifth of the weight of traditional green roof media. So what happens is now that opens up the opportunity for a lot more growth, for a lot more usage on building retrofits. Roofs that typically could not accommodate a green roof due to weight limitations. Now can have a green roof, and that opens up a host of opportunities in older buildings without us having to build from scratch. Not to mention the fact that it grows 40 to 60% better than regular topsoil due to its pore space. So this Gaia soil, it powers the rest of our technological suite, which we try to build for all types of surfaces. So our green roofs for roofs, floating wetlands for streets and underpasses, blue block filters for coastlines, eco barriers for bike lanes, and green walls for the 3,000 square miles of vertical surface. Oops, I skipped. Oh no, it's all good. So one of the interesting things about New York is that New York produces a lot of waste. New York has only 70% of the population of Tokyo's metro area, but we produce nearly 3 times more waste daily. And here's just a breakdown of some of the waste materials that we produce. A lot of the fill material is recycled, but a lot isn't. And this type of fill material could then be used to make stuff like Gaia soil. It could be made to make other types of soil where it's not necessary for it to be as lightweight. For example, if it's something in the ground. And the various aggregates, the stones, the glass, the concrete, the brick can be used to create aquifers underneath their streets. So a vision of a sustainable city does not necessarily need to even rely on the stuff we can see on our buildings. It could be the stuff that's underneath our feet, such as Paul's wonderful work at the Sims site in the Bronx. So I know you've seen this image once before in the presentation. I'll show it to you again, but this time with the original photo that I took that day. This is in Hunts Point, and this is an underpass that does not look very inviting. This is strictly a piece of transportation infrastructure, but greening this area can turn it into a piece of mixed-use infrastructure. So now you can have something that captures the pollution from the 13,000 trucks that drive by every day in this section of the city. And now you can, now this area brings value to the communities around it. Typically, underpasses separate communities. Well, we want to bring them together by turning infrastructure that only serves one purpose into infrastructure that serves many purposes. And honestly, this just looks much more inviting. So why not? And then you have, of course, our Roosevelt Island rendering, which just shows the amount of carbon capture that you can have throughout the city and all types of surfaces. So vegetation not only captures carbon like in a secondary way just by reducing energy costs, it also directly captures carbon and puts it in the soil rather than in the atmosphere. Next up is colleague and co-founder we found, Michael Fishman.
Thanks, Igor. And well done, everybody. It is a great panel. I'm watching the notes. I'm going to be as quick as I can. You can move to the next slide so that we can get some question and answers as possible. You know, in a way, I've been bugging Paul Mankiewicz my entire career until he let me work with him, so that instead of being in attendance at some of these presentations as I can, I get to present with him. But really, in many ways, mine is the urban scale, the replicability. You know, it's not just about what we build, it's about how we use what we build. You know, we're in a city of islands, even though songs are written about New York as a concrete jungle. We really are a city of islands. There's, in my view, no reason for there to be tractor trailers, 18-wheeler containerization east of the Hudson River. One of the beautiful things about using recycled plastics, recycled glass, is that Sims, for example, as Paul pointed out, is on the waterfront in multiple locations. In our region, we can be moving these materials by water, for water, not adding emissions and trucks to our streets by doing this. And I think it's also important to say that, you know, in a way, there's an element of green infrastructure that until it is commoditized, until it is replicable and essentially scalable, there are wasteful aspects to even doing the best work we can, right? So one-off projects, when we all face the same challenges instead of solutions that can be applied to multiple locations, is a wasteful exercise. I like the team that we have here at Leaf Island, just to say briefly that we're using all of these pieces of the puzzle to find ways of solving multiple problems at once. Please, next slide. Yeah. So very briefly, nature doesn't stop at the edge. It's not a mistake. Maybe that I grew up with my last name as Fishman. I feel like I have a certain amphibious nature. Living shorelines are well known. Most of the group on the call is probably familiar with living shorelines. And at the same time, again, vanity projects is maybe too strong a word, but one-off projects do not get us as far as we need to be. We all face the same sea level rise up and down the eastern seaboard, if not globally. Why are we not moving these pieces into place at a rapid rate for prefabrication? And of course, the life aquatic. You know, there are livable living systems that exist and are very valuable to us. The capacity for an adult oyster to filter 50, 60 gallons of water a day means that every time we employ the Billion Oyster Project to help us to reconstitute oyster beds in our region, we're literally decreasing the need for more and more treatment, man-made treatment plants. And you can move to the next slide. What helped us, I think, win the Green Tech award for urban planning was scale and looking at all the properties within the city's control in the Hunts Point area for the food market. Of course, there are 4 treatment plants right in the neighborhood here surrounding Rikers Island, water treatment plants, and the concept that over the next century we are decommissioning wastewater treatment plants and bringing new ones online, but that could happen in concert with living shorelines is something that we're very keen to promote, because I think that it starts to speak of an evolution toward nature-based designs, nature-based solutions for problems that are again common to all of us. So when we're decommissioning, that presents an opportunity. for retrofit. It's sort of a yes and mentality rather than a no but mentality. And if you go to the last slide, I think somebody put in the chat that, you know, this in effect should have been our first slide. We've turned it into our last slide, but I appreciate the enthusiasm, which is to say, look, you know, Central Park is sort of the closest we come to maintaining that Manhattan average mean temperature, right? Approximately 80 degrees on this particular day. And what would happen is, as Igor said, if we were at 25%, you can see we'd come closer from, you know, 92 to 86 degrees, and even 50% if it's feasible. You know, we could even get to parity with Central Park. And I think that this is a good concluding slide. I'd much rather hear from everyone else with the 5 minutes we have left on the time scale than hear myself. So thank you for your attention.